good afternoon to all of you. Very good afternoon to all my journalist friends, rather. In fact, ISB, in partnership with this US Consulate, is happy to organize this series, and we look forward for an active participation from my media friends. I would like to invite my senior colleague, Kumar Guru, Director External Relations, to deliver a welcome remarks and also to talk about this partnership with the US Consulate. Over to you, Guru.
Thank you, Sridhar. Good afternoon, everyone. Want to extend a very warm welcome on my behalf to all of you for joining us this afternoon. I know all of you lead an extremely busy life, unlike some of us. There's no end to news, both in terms of newsmakers and those of you who are out there capturing these things and conveying it to us. And we are beneficiaries of the work that you do. So I want to thank you all for taking out time. This initiative of a workshop for journalists is part of a public diplomacy grants program of the US mission in India, more specifically the US Consulate General in Hyderabad, where we are working on a series of programs. This being the first formal initiative under the auspices of this grant, which is about discussing on the revised roadmap for Indo-Pacific regional cooperation in a post-COVID-19 world order. There will be a larger conference sometime later. We are thinking of September, but who knows how things are going to develop. But anyways, so that we will keep you informed as and when things firm up. But one of the things that we said we should do is to sort of organize a series of masterclasses where journalists like you can sort of benefit from the expertise of some people who have studied this field extensively, and therefore can throw more light on different aspects of the Indo-Pacific cooperation, whether it is security, whether it is Quad plus China, or whether it is economic cooperation and so on. So we have lined up 3 masterclasses. All of you have those details. I do want to sort of just take a minute to thank the US Consulate General in Hyderabad for their partnership. ISB has worked with the US Consulate over many years now in successfully sort of organizing many such wonderful initiatives. So I want to thank our friends there for this. Specifically, I want to thank David Moyer, who is the Public Affairs Officer, for his leadership in this partnership. And today, in just a couple of minutes, we'll have the benefit of listening to Sean Ruta, who is the Political and Economic Chief at the US Consulate General in Hyderabad, and previously, had a extensive experience in studying and working in this area. So we'll listen to him talk about the US perspective on this issue, and also in general, perhaps on the US-India relations as well. All of you know, and this is something that I'm going to state is just again restating the obvious. The 2 largest democracies in the world are very closely tied at multiple levels. As we speak today, we have the Presidential Special Envoy on Climate Change, Secretary Kerry, visiting India. We've just hosted the Defense Secretary, I think, last week. So there are very, very, at the level of the government, at the level of people, business, economic, or even, in multiple fields, there's a very strong partnership between the 2 countries. So therefore, this particular engagement is one such where we are extending this partnership to sort of bring forth more knowledge-oriented events to our stakeholders. Indo-Pacific is a topic that we will be discussing through these engagements over the next few months. And I will sort of not delve into it right now because there are experts who will actually talk about it. But it is safe to say that India is assuming and will assume a far more important role in the context of Indo-Pacific, and it is up to us to see how we are going to use that partnership to sort of reap dividends. And I think with those few words, I want to thank all of you again for joining us this afternoon, and I want to recognize our friends from the US Consulate who are also on the call. Over to you, Sridhar. Thank you.
Thank you, Guru, for the welcome remarks. And without delay, I would like to invite Sean Ruthe, Political and Economic Chief, the US Consulate General Hyderabad, to deliver a address, and specifically would request him to touch upon the US policies towards Indo-Pacific and talk on the continuous and change.
I'm sorry. I've lost you just a moment. Are you still speaking?
No, I think you're good to go, Sean.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm done.
It's always a little disconcerting,
Yes.
doing these things
Go ahead.
virtually when you cannot see the audience. In the absence of that, and not to waste anybody's time, I'll launch right in. So what I'd like to speak to you about very briefly is the United States Indo-Pacific Strategy, a subject near and dear to all of our hearts here in Mission India. And I have to say, as a side note, it's such a pleasure to be associated with the ISB here. I was most recently there in December, had a really wonderful conversation with some of the senior faculty, and we really value the role that your institution has played in the U.S.-India strategic partnership over the last several years. I saw a number of photos of some of the more famous visits that you've hosted from U.S. officials when I was there last. And so thank you for having me. But just to launch right in, the United States Indo-Pacific Strategy, and since I'm speaking to a relatively sophisticated audience, I will keep this to beyond the top lines, we'll call it. I think you know, because you're readers and you're journalists, what has been put out in the press. And I'm not here to give anything sensational, but I do want to drill down a little bit on what exactly the IPS, if you'll forgive my use of the acronym, means from the perspective of the United States and what it means in the context of the United States-India bilateral relationship. So a little bit about me. As mentioned, I'm the chief of our small but mighty political economic section here in the Consulate General, Hyderabad. Our consulate covers the states of Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Orissa. So not to be confused with Chhattisgarh, for example, which is covered out of our consulate in Bombay, and of course also Maharashtra, Gujarat, or the southern states of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka that are covered out of our consulate general in Chennai, who also covers Pondicherry. So we focus on the Telugu-speaking states and Orissa. That's the writ of our consulate general, and so you should know that because we look at the Indo-Pacific strategy really from our, what you could think of as a soda straw viewpoint, right? Mission India more broadly has a much more strategic purview. But from our perspective here at the Consulate General, we mainly interact with the state governments in our district, the civil society activists, the academicians, the CEOs, the entrepreneurs, from the perspective of a subsidiary or constituent post of US Mission India, which is obviously headquartered out of the embassy in New Delhi. Prior to this assignment, I was the Indo-Pacific Strategy Officer for the bilateral US-Sri Lanka relationship in Colombo. And prior to that, I had done another tour in Colombo focusing on human rights. I've also done diplomatic assignments in Guatemala and Slovenia and Washington, D.C. And before all of that, I was an American Army officer serving in California, Iraq, and South Korea. I had to remember that. That was many years ago. So there's your introduction. We're going to move right in. The Indo-Pacific strategy, I think for your benefit, again, because we're talking to a sophisticated audience, it helps by starting out talking about what the IPS is not. Oh, and another side point, if I may. None of my remarks are for attribution. So if any of you journalists are working on a side hustle and you want remarks for attribution from the consulate, please feel free to reach out through Salil or others of our staff to Mr. David Moyer, the Public Affairs Officer, and I'm sure he'll be happy to help you with remarks for attribution, but mine are not. So the Indo-Pacific strategy, what it's not, right? We are all of us prisoners of our vernacular. So the Indo-Pacific strategy, what it's not. One thing that I've noticed serving in the region, and I think this is especially an issue in Anglophone countries or Commonwealth countries where English is widely spoken, in places like India and other parts of South and Southeast Asia, I've noticed that there is sometimes confusion around our usage of the word strategy. So the Indo-Pacific Strategy is not some sort of new military alliance. That's not what the IPS is. And part of this is a vernacular issue. In the United States, the federal government, we have strategies for everything. We have a strategy to eradicate hunger, a strategy, national strategy on homelessness. Strategy really does not refer necessarily to some sort of military security alliance. And yet, there have been many cases in the past couple of years where people have brought up, ooh, the strategy, this must mean the anti-China new military alliance. It's an Asian NATO. That's absolutely wrong. And it reflects a sort of fundamental misunderstanding of the way that the United States federal government bureaucratically uses nomenclature. So the Indo-Pacific Strategy can more accurately be thought of as our whole of government approach to the region. And the Indo-Pacific region, as you know, stretches all the way from the east coast of Africa to sunny California. These are the littoral and maritime states of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So the United States is very much an Indo-Pacific country, as of course is India, smack in the center of it. But so is China. And this brings me to the second, what the Indo-Pacific Strategy is not, point. And that is, it's not some sort of anti-China or contain China grouping. That is not and never has been the intent of the Indo-Pacific Strategy. And actually, that's explicitly stated in the strategy documents that have been released by the White House and were declassified in January of this year. China is also very much an Indo-Pacific nation. And actually, the United States cooperates with China in several areas, including counterterrorism, maritime piracy issues. All that we expect from the People's Republic of China is that what we expect of ourselves and other member states of this grand Indo-Pacific region. And that is to play by the rules, right? The rules of the international order, operate in an open and transparent manner vis-a-vis bilateral and multilateral relationships. And oh, by the way, that brings me to my third point. The Indo-Pacific Strategy, central to it is ASEAN and the ASEAN Regional Forum, of which India is also a member. So the fourth top line point before we get into the specifics of the strategy is that, and the Quad. Now, many of you, even though I know that you're dedicated journalists, may have forgotten, just like many Americans have forgotten. The Quad is actually not new. The Quad initially formed in 2004 as a response to the great tsunami then. My last posting was in Sri Lanka. There's still legacy issues related to the utter devastation visited on that country by the tsunami in 2004. But that was really the inception of the Quad. And then in 2007, it was sort of resurrected and empowered more, but that has continued. And so I noticed in our program today, the discussion will center around continuity and change in the Indo-Pacific US-India relationship as it relates to the Indo-Pacific. And I have to tell you, from our perspective, the story is really one of continuity. It's not one of change. So you may ask yourself, well, isn't this just like, the rebalance or the pivot toward Asia in the Obama administration? President Trump announced the Indo-Pacific Strategy. And the answer is, you're right. It's largely tracks along the same lines. The balance, the pivot to Asia, the Indo-Pacific Strategy, we may have a new, nomenclature formulation in the coming years. I don't know. But this is all represents the continuity of the centrality of the Indo-Pacific to the foreign policy of the United States. And the Quad is only the latest manifestation, this head of government, head of state summit with Prime Ministers Suga, Morrison, Modi, and President Biden. This is a dramatic, from our perspective, reinforcement of the centrality of the Quad to the Indo-Pacific, which is, of course, itself central to the foreign policy of the United States. So getting a little deeper into the weeds, the Indo-Pacific Strategy generally comprises three areas, right? Economics, governance, and security. And in that security area is the area in which we focus on a free and open Indo-Pacific, generally along the lines of international law. So, for example, I don't think I need to belabor the South China Sea situation to you all, but, there are certain member states, signatories to the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, who don't follow the rules. We, the United States, are not ourselves signatories to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, out of an abundance of caution. And yet, our Navy, our maritime shipping industry scrupulously follow the provisions under UNCLOS that relate to free and open navigation, which is vital, not just to the countries of the Indo-Pacific, but to the entire planet. You know, there are a couple of statistics. I hate getting buried in statistics, but there are a couple that you should take away, very generally speaking. One is more human beings live in the Indo-Pacific than live outside of it, okay? Another is the United States conducted $1.8 trillion in two-way trade in Indo-Pacific nations in 2017. That's bilateral trade total, 1.8 trillion, okay? Now, that sounds like a big number, and sometimes when we use big numbers, they're so big they're almost meaningless. So let me contextualize it for you. That 1.8 trillion is over over 100% increase, more than doubled since 2007. So that rate of change is faster here than anywhere else on the planet in terms of bilateral trade. Another statistic you should come away with is we estimate, and not just ourselves, but international financial institutions estimate the Indo-Pacific requires roughly $1.7 trillion in infrastructure investment per year, or around 26 trillion by 2030. So where is this going to come from, right? Infrastructure investment is one of those areas that, doesn't come without coordination of states, of governments, because they're just such massive capital investment. There is a role to play for the public sector writ large, for states to play in spurring private investment, because again, that's the way the United States thinks it works best. Not so much state-driven, state-dominated, inefficient infrastructure investment, but private sector investment with the role to play by states. And to that end, at least on the investment part, the United States is putting its money where its mouth is. And so, for example, you saw, I think, this deliverable out of the head of state, head of government meeting of the Quad, in which the United States International Development Finance Corporation, and this, by the way, is the successor agency to what we used to call the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC, and the USAID's Development Credit Authority. So USAID's Development Credit Authority and OPIC merged to become this new thing, actually new and far more powerful thing, called the United States International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC. And our DFC, which is a government entity of the United States, has an attaché here in India. He lives and works out of Consulate General Mumbai. But out of that Quad, the major deliverable out of the entire Quad directly relates to Hyderabad. And that was this announcement by the USDFC that they would be partnering with Biological E Limited, the pharmaceutical company based here in Hyderabad, to strengthen their supply chain to achieve a goal of over 1 billion vaccines annually produced by 2022 for COVID-19. So that's huge. And the fact that the United States government is using public money to facilitate that, the largest deliverable out of the Quad, should tell you something about our commitment to the Quad as a sub-institution of the Indo-Pacific Strategy. And the answer is quite a lot. But again, from our perspective also, this is largely a continuation of the position of the United States over the last several decades, or at least going back to 2004 when the Quad, like I said, was initiated. And even before that, you could make a great argument that the United States investment in this region, in the Indo-Pacific region, in terms of the Indo-Pacific Command, which is headquartered in Hawaii, the partnership exercises that they do with ASEAN member states, for example, the United States putting an ambassador in ASEAN, at ASEAN in Jakarta, even though we ourselves are not members of ASEAN, but like India, members of the ASEAN Regional Forum. All of these demonstrate the United States' commitment, not just to the region, but to the concept of the Indo-Pacific. So again, the three pillars of the Indo-Pacific strategy are economics, governance, and security. Under the economic pillar, infrastructure is very, very front and center right now. But I would also argue that given the pandemic, that's front and center too. Under governance, we're talking about the ways that the states of the Indo-Pacific conduct themselves vis-a-vis the rule of law. So this applies in trade relationships. This also applies to more traditional governance issues vis-a-vis minority populations, respect for human rights, et cetera. And then finally, the security pillar that I mentioned, and frankly, this is a very bright spot in the U.S.-India bilateral relationship. The mill-to-mill relationship between our two countries has arguably never been stronger. It's something we're very proud of, and we're proud to partner with the incredibly talented and dedicated women and men of the Indian Armed Forces, who genuinely, I believe, represent the best of this country. So that said, I will turn it back over to your organizers out of fear of going too long. And I apologize that there's not going to be any questions. But again, I would encourage you, the journalists participating in our program today, who thank you again for coming, to reach out to the public affairs section of the Consulate General, especially if you're working on something that you need a quote or a statement for, but also just to keep in touch. We believe these sorts of programmatic interventions that we're sponsoring today with the Indians, with the Indian School of Business, it's not a quid pro quo. It's not like we get something out of it. We genuinely believe in investing in the future of India because that's good for the United States. So I guess we do get something out of it in the long term, but it's not something that we expect some sort of short-term return on. So know that you are special to us, not just because of the work you do day in and day out to report on the facts that matter to people's lives here, but because we believe that you can carry the message of what's really going on. Many times in many countries, including our own, there is this unfortunate tendency to sensationalize on the part of certain media outlets or certain journalists. I know none of you will ever fall for that temptation, but just to reiterate the point and send it home, please understand that from our perspective, this bilateral relationship between the United States and India could not be more important. And the fact that one of the very first things that the new president of the United States participated in was the Quad with Prime Minister Modi illustrates that better than anything I could say. And then you add to that the fact that one of the few foreign trips that the previous president made, you remember he was famous for not liking to travel very much, but one of the few trips he did make abroad that he spoke about on and on was his trip to India. And so what we have in this bilateral partnership, this strategic partnership between our two countries, is really a continuity that transcends our own domestic partisanship between the left and the right, and reflects rather the centrality to the interests of the United States, this bilateral partnership, the Indo-Pacific Strategy, and I think more specifically, you could say the Quad. So I hope that answers any questions you may have had asked had you had the chance to ask them. But even if it doesn't, please feel free to reach out to the public affairs section, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, yeah. Thank you, Sean, for this special address and emphasizing on the importance of the Indo-US relations and talking about the continuities and changes. In fact, the IPS strategy is well framed. So we will quickly move to the next part of the agenda. And I hope Lieutenant General Menon, are you here?
He's on the call, Sridhar.
Yeah, he's on the call, yes. Meanwhile, he comes on the picture. I would just like to briefly introduce him. In fact, the broad thing is it is well recognized the fact that security has a strong and positive relation with democracy and development. So in this context, actually, security cooperation becomes very critical, and to understand this systematically becomes very important. And hence, to talk about this, we have none other than Lieutenant General Dr. Prakash Menon, who was the founder of former military advisor at the National Security Council Secretariat, and was also associated with multiple institutions. Primarily, he leads the strategic studies program at the Takshashila institutions at Bengaluru. He also teaches at various places like Transdisciplinary University in Bangalore and National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore. So he's also Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. He is also appointed as an expert for creation of Indian National Defense University, is called, and he's been a visiting fellow. In fact, he authored a couple of books, one on strategy trap, which talks about India, Pakistan under the nuclear shadow, which is actually an extension of his PhD thesis, Limited War and Nuclear Deterrence in Indo-Pak Context, awarded by the Madras University. And he also co-authored another book called Non-Alignment 2.0, along with Sunil Khilani and Pratap Banu Mehta and others. So that is the academic part of his thing. In addition to that, he actually served in the Indian Army for almost 40 years and have extensive operational experience as a company commander on the Siachen Glacier and line of control in Kashmir region. In fact, when I did my public policy course in Takshashila, the institution that we represent now, I had the pleasure to attend and interact with one of his lectures, and where he was talking about the extent of challenges that he had to face, and I hope some of those would reflect in his address today. General Menon had played an important role at the policy level. He was the military advisor and secretary to Government of India, and later on as an officer on special duty at the National Security Council Secretariat. With this vast experience on security matters, we are happy to have him here for to take a masterclass to my journalist friends. The idea is to give you a systematic perspective on which you will it will help you in reporting on Indo-Pacific issues. We will have, as an overall theme, we'll have three major themes: security, geopolitics, and strategic economic partnership. But today we will be focusing on security aspects. And on 9th April, that is day after tomorrow, we will deal with the other two aspects on that. So before I give this virtual mic to General Menon, a couple of statutory things. General Menon will make a presentation for half an hour or so, and then we'll open for interaction. So whoever would like to ask questions, request you to raise hands through the virtual Zoom mode. And otherwise, you can also chat. You can also write it in the chat box, and probably we'll pick up a couple, and then he will address them. So would request you to switch off the audio unless and until you have to speak. And in the end, we will be sharing a small feedback form and request you to, it will not take more than 2 minutes for you to do this. So please kindly address that. And we'll also like to have a group screenshot at the end, and please on your videos so that we can do this screenshot. Over to you, General Menon.
Thank you, Sridhar, and thank you, ISB, for this honor and this invitation to talk to a group of journalists. I've never done that before. And I'm excited. And I especially look forward to the interaction which we have, because that is, I think, where the real knowledge comes out. So I've been asked to speak on the issue of security and the Indo-Pacific. I'm sure as journalists, as senior members, this must be a very exciting time to be in this profession in the information age. And I'm sure those of you who have been there long enough would know that a lot of things change, some things never do. Because the things which don't change mostly is human nature itself. What drives human behavior has got the basic roots which is derived from the soil of human nature. That doesn't change. And actually that could possibly explain a whole lot of things better than anything else, because that represents continuity. The rest is all changes. And we must be able to differentiate the two, because continuity actually tells you about how the past is connected to the present. And maybe it does, in whatever hazy manner, indicate the future, which will never be known, and it is unpredictable. That we also know. So, as journalists, when we talk about information and incident, which you want to actually think about, you have to relate the part to the whole, because information becomes knowledge only when pieces are put together and seen in the largest perspective possible. What is the big picture? How does what is happening in the Philippines, where 250 Chinese fishing boats are actually having a standoff about a reef which actually comes above water only on low tide? What does that signify? By itself, it looks damn foolish. But it's got a long story to tell when you look at the larger picture. So, what I'll try to do is to identify the notion of Indo-Pacific in the larger, what I would term as geopolitical competition of the state of the world. And that competition, you might call it whatever you want, competition, confrontation, or anything that you like, is about the story of China's rise, the story of power, economic power moving from the west to the east, of the reaction that has actually entailed, of the behavior of various nations, especially China itself. And why is it happening is the first question which we need to try and answer. And let me tell you, I will use a theoretical proposition of geopolitics itself, not based on any particular one, but the notion that all human affairs will finally have to be distilled by waters of politics. We might call it geopolitics, we might call it what you want, and politics finally will determine how power is distributed and how power is applied and practiced. So what we are seeing in the global world is a nice story of power itself. I mean, you can look at how small human communities and families, how a singular, suddenly rich man in the family starts behaving in a particular way to the others who are not that endowed. You can see the change of behavior. Strength normally brings arrogance and confidence, and everybody wants to be strong because that is the only way to make progress. That's probably right. So what we are actually seeing is an age-old story. It's got a lot of historic continuity there. Only the actors are different. Only the forms in which it is being practiced has got fundamentally driven by technology. But human nature is very much around. And what is that story? The story now, at this point in time, is about a power which is rising, no doubt about it, and a competition within another power which was practically the number one power, especially after the Cold War. Now there is a competitor in town who actually now start actually telling them that I've already arrived. Better treat me well, speak to me well. I mean, if you see the Alaska conversation, I think the Chinese made no bones about that particular message they want to tell the Americans. We're equals. This is power, this is human nature talking. But what is the issue? And I think that is where we need to look at geography. Although I find that, there is a class in geopolitics tomorrow, and I would think that the security situation is born out of geopolitics. So really speaking, you can't really divorce the two, because geopolitics will also explain geoeconomics, which is the business part of it. So I would think that what I say now might overlap a lot with whoever's going to take that class tomorrow in geopolitics. Because you can't talk about security without understanding geopolitics. Geopolitics is where there is an incidence of geography with political communities, and for which the generals normally require a map. So pardon me till I give you my, I hope you can see my slide. Yeah, Sridhar?
Generally, if you can make it into slideshow.
Okay, you're right. Turn into this. Okay, done. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So during the Cold War, we looked at the global map like this, because the confrontation was between the United States and the USSR, Europe, and therefore the center was the Atlantic. With the United States, with the Soviet Union gone, and Russia now what it is, and China on the rise, we should be looking, and this is what we do, at maps like this. This is the change of perspective, because what has happened, as I told you before, is that economic power has shifted from the west to the east, but military power has not. Military power still is very much with the Western powers. China might claim that it has reached, but it's got a long way to go. It has ambitions to be a significant maritime power, and we'll realize why it wants to be, but it still have a long way to go. Not that it can be wished off now, but the equal the United States in military power is going to take them a long time. It's not going to be easy, but the tremendous progress that they make, their capability to build maritime power, the number of dockyards that they have, and the number of ships they can roll out is certainly very impressive. You can make all these material stuff, but to train sailors to operate it and for them to have experience also takes time. It's like an aircraft carrier. You speak to an aircraft carrier pilot, he'll tell you as to how long it takes to really get used to land and take off in rough seas in an aircraft carrier. So military power still resides with the West. Chinese power is rising. And therefore, when you look at this map, the idea of the Indo-Pacific is because now this map can explain it. This. And what is this map? This shows the global maritime traffic flow as a picture, you can say, captured at the same time. The Indian Ocean and the South China Sea has got a lot of traffic here, and this traffic is involved with the rising power for China, because the shift of economic power to Asia was not only China, it was also about the rise of India. So both India's interests and its trade and energy flow uses the Indian Ocean, as also the South China Sea and the Western Pacific, which abuts the eastern coast of China. So, because of this, The Chinese look at this map, and I've placed it in such a way to sort of give you a glimpse of why China feels that it is eastern coast can be suffocated by a whole chain of islands who, if they turn inimical, can interfere with their trade. For after all, geoeconomics, on which all the rationale for trade and globalization was based very successfully, although it's having a little bit of a hard time at the moment, is based on free flow of trade. So if you look at this map and you see Taiwan, see Japan, Philippines, the South China Sea, Vietnam, and the rest of it, and I know there is this notion of the first island chain and the second island chains. These are all military imaginations. And these imaginations say that anybody who's trying to get tough with China, this is a weak point. This is a geographical vulnerability which can be exploited by inimical forces. This is about what geography has bequeathed China. This is not only just off its eastern coast, but it also is, as you can see, in this area where the Chinese have made, the 9-dashed line, made a lot of claims. There's a whole lot of counterclaims, starting with Japan to the north, Taiwan is involved, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, you name it, and a whole lot of islands and so on, which are now. This is in an area which, if I want to just take you back, here's my pointer. This is the area where all these, so Chinese territorial claims sit on top of these trade routes, and those trade routes are used by most of the countries which are maritime traders. China itself is a big one. So it can act in both ways. It can stop China's or hinder China's trade, or China can stop others from doing it. So the point is that this area is contested, and China has not shown any respect for the international court's judgment when Philippines took them. They show no respect for the law of the sleeves, UNCLOS, although they claim they do. And therefore, this is a point again of friction. And as you know, they've gone ahead and taken charge of a lot of islands, uninhabited, created military facilities, fortified them, and that's something which has been going on for more than a decade. So I'll just give you what this looked like on March 11th and what it looks like now. Here it is. I mean, this is just to give you an idea of how the Chinese do it. Because their ability to construct infrastructural building is commendable. Now, we might talk about standards being low and so on, but the speed and their ability to organize themselves, and therefore the ability of political organization, is obviously stronger than other nations of the world. So this doesn't end here, the problem with China. It's got its choke points, because the trade now, China cannot grow without energy and merchandise trade. It just cannot. Energy it has to get mostly from the Gulf. Therefore, it has to pass through the South China Seas, the Western Pacific, it has to pass through the Malacca Straits here, and a couple of other straits which are Sunda, Lombok, on the Umbarvatar here, these sort of straits, but Malacca is the main at the moment. These are straits which are small enough, can be blocked. But these are imaginations. I mean, blocking Malacca Strait would actually mean that there is a world war. I mean, nobody would actually block it otherwise. So this is another problem, that the Indian Ocean is an enclosed ocean and it's got choke points. And these are 4 choke points on this side. It's got other choke points also. So what has China done? It has therefore launched to get over these problems about being choked. What is called this used to be called One Belt, One Road. Now it's called the Belt and Road Initiator, which is a global infrastructure project which the world has never seen till now. Its accomplishments are definitely notable. It's faced a lot of problems among many countries where it is. It has also been described as a place or a venture which has got highly geopolitical and strategic consequences. And they have been accused of debt diplomacy because most of the money which they give out for projects for countries to have are actually mortgaged. And you know the story of Hamban Tota, which the Chinese have taken over on a 99-year-old lease because they could not pay them back. But one thing surprises me about the map, and I was trying to find a map which doesn't have this, that the Chinese have continuously been showing Kolkata as one of the nodes in their maps also. It defies me as to why they do that, because India, right from the beginning, as you know, refused to join the BRI on grounds of sovereignty, and the CPEC, which is here. And the other one, actually, it's on both sides of India. There's CPEC, then this is the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. We've got a port and all. This port is not shown, a port is somewhere here. That's also already come up. There is a pipeline and a gas pipeline which actually already connects that port to Kunming in China. So it's something which is really commendable. But what is it about? It is about China wanting access to resources which it needs to grow. And where are those resources? Part of it is in West Asia, the energy resources. And a whole lot of that other is in Africa. China is building 46 ports in Africa. 4 of them on the Indian Ocean side. The rest are not on the Indian Ocean. And China has deeply embedded itself with many governments by means that only the Chinese are quite capable of, because they have the money to do so. Of course, pushback in some places already started. So the larger issue is Chinese, you can say, wanting these resources for their growth, and then fearing that this trade which they have and these resources which they need can be interfered with when things go bad between the countries. And what have they done, have to do for all this? They so far used power, and if you see the South China Sea area, they're all the small guys. They are the ASEAN, they're too small. The Chinese are constantly telling them, you're too big, you better listen to what we say. Because the Chinese feel that if those nations have got leanings on sides which can be inimical to them, they believe it is a threat to them. And that is why the Chinese are actually having problems with all the nations there. Until now, those nations, their options were curtailed because in the Trump era and Trump's policies did not endow them with these nations. But things looks like are starting to change. With the Biden administration itself, the initiatives which have been launched And China's worst fears are now coming home to roost. It looks like after the pandemic, what China fears most is other nations ganging up against them. That is their strategic fear deeply embedded in the Chinese strike. That is what they want to avoid. Because then they know most of their projects actually can come to naught. So the game is about influence. The Americans are trying to improve and gain more influence. Chinese are actually trying to prevent it and gain for whatever they can from their side to whichever means that they can do. And they seem to be pretty good and pretty successful at it. Not fully though. Because their ability to deliver is unmatched. All the rest of the nations and all the groupings talk more and deliver less, except probably the Japanese. And that's just a simple statement of fact. If you look at the vision documents of various groupings and what they're supposed to do and how much they have achieved, we journalists can really have a good story about what has been promised and what is actually being delivered. So it is this imbalance which has to be corrected. That if the rise of China has to be balanced, then the ability to cooperate collectively with common interests for the common good will have to be based not on speeches and statements. It will have to be translated on the ground. And that's the challenge. So there is a lot of work for journalists to do because the Indo-Pacific has got the global game going in its focus. It's about, you can always classify it the way that you want, but it is about how a rising power is seen to threaten and displace the status quo to the detrimental of others, or it can be seen as the natural consequences of power shifts. So you can have a geopolitical explanation of natural consequences of power shifts. Whenever somebody becomes too powerful, the others will gang up against them. That is the natural tendency. That is human nature. Because nobody wants to have a guy to tell them and dictate for them. That is why India always talks about a multipolar world. So if China is trying to make a sinosphere in Asia, India talks about a multipolar world. And the Indian attitude has been one of hesitance, has been one where although the Chinese were sending us messages, and I think when Doklam first happened, and what happened after Doklam, even up till now, that the Chinese have occupied the complete plateau, militarized that whole place. And after all, that is this disputed territory, has made even a village there. Takshashila institution is a complete document which is updated from 2020 for you to look at what the Chinese have done in Doklam. It is backed up by satellite images, and they don't lie. But what did we do? We came to an immediate agreement, declared victory. Then we had Wuhan, then we had Mamallapuram. That time itself, Takshashila had said that the Chinese will come back to ask for more. They did. And what has actually changed is probably what happened in Ladakh. And although we don't know the details of the Galwan incident, the loss of lives there was tactical, but the effect has been strategic. That India's attitude towards China has obviously shifted. That the trust that has been lost will be difficult to regain. But that doesn't mean that India is going to get into a military alliance with any country, because let me put it this way. China must be telling the world that they are so powerful. But India is a nuclear power, and so is China a nuclear power. The big fight cannot take place between nuclear powers. So although the military imagination must be talking about how China is going to come through Dapsang and actually cut off the Siachen glacier and all, those can happen only in big wars. China is not using force for big wars. China knows very well that the present conditions, even between the Americans and Chinese, all these particular types of military doctrines will not stand the harsh test of reality, because nuclear weapons will cast a shadow. The type of force that you can use will have to be restricted, will actually have to be restrained. Of course, there's always a chance that because of miscommunication, misjudgment, misperception, escalation can take place. But both, I'm sure all these national leaders know that we should not take that risk, because the risk is too much. It's not worth the stakes. Cannot. I mean, it's an existential issue. So the point is that China, as far as military threat to India is concerned, cannot do the big stuff so easily, because we are not anymore like the 1962 military. We have the Himalayas to defend, which are formidable Himalaya features, and therefore we have an advantage. They have to cross the Himalayas and maintain an army across the Himalayas. And that's not ever going to be easy for any armed forces or any nation. And I think by now we know that we can actually stand up to what the Chinese are up to. Yes, they can bite here and bite there, but so can we, as we had already shown it to them by the occupation of the Kailash Ridge. So we leave the question as to why did they do this there, but I want to leave you with the thought that militarily they can send us messages, they can play psychological games, because they have certain advantages because of the fact that they have got much more areas in Tibet and so on. But those are small stuff, but important psychological messages can be done. And eventually all actions is about affecting the psychology of the other person. That's where it matters. That's where information matters. That is where knowledge matters. Because without that, all action is useless. How does it affect? So I just want to show you this map to tell you that the Indian Ocean is so important for trade, both for China, India, all of Japan, the East Asian countries, ASEAN, everybody, and including India, because a lot of India's trade is now going through that side. So we have a situation where, as far as commercial and economic ties are concerned, they still endure. After all, whatever might be the tensions, both with the US and China, economic activities are going on. So also with us, so also with all the nations of the world. But that is above the surface. But below the surface, there are a lot of tensions building up fundamentally because of the furious pace of armament which is taking place, that all countries are buying arms to protect themselves. And all it does is, and this is historical, it's got action reactions. So whether America builds a missile defense system, then the Chinese will also build it. Because the Chinese will also build it, then the Indians will also have to build it. And because we build it, then the Pakistan. So it's got a sort of wave effect. So there is security is on the loose in the Indo-Pacific. There are groupings which people are exploring. There are India, which is in many groups, will probably have to see as to how it will pan out in several other groups, because you're in this thing. So there are complex web of relationship floating in the waters of the Indo-Pacific. They generate a whole lot of insecurities. And what we are seeing now is also there is a scramble by a set of countries. They don't want to say it is against China, but they say that it is required to actually enforce international law, which is being violated, and you know who's violating it. So the point is that we have counters to all this, and what you see in blue is what was rolled out in 2017. It was called the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. It was a project between Japan and India. US journalists can actually, it'd be nice to find out where this, whatever was professed, whatever was adopted, what is the statement, how much has actually taken place on the ground. And of course, we have also many other things. With the Indian Ocean, we call it Sagar. It's got all sort of fancy acronyms, which will, it's called Sagar Mala, Security and Growth. And this is one of the official maps where Indian flag is put all over the place to say that India touches base with all these people. But the question we ask, what does it mean on the ground? That will actually be, you can have all these slogans, but if you can't effectively convert it, then it's pointless. So India must look at the map like this. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Because our continental boundaries, especially towards the west with Pakistan, with China, and now to a certain extent with Myanmar, of course we have a look east policy and some roads and pipelines and so on, which have been struggling to be built, is also blocked. What gives us, and this has historically been true, when India has traded with the rest of the world, it's been at its best. So we need the oceans, and China might build a lot of land connectivity, but the ability of ships to carry containers and the amount of load that they carry in one ship, and the lesser resistance that water provides than to land travel, will always keep maritime trade alive and kicking, because it is the most economical. So the game is about the fear of China based on its geographic vulnerabilities and the growth and the focus of other nations who feel that the China is the one who's at fault here. China says the others are at fault, so it has to become stronger. It has to become a maritime power and protect its own. So that's the story of security. There is something called the security-insecurity paradox, which is the more a nation tries to make itself secure, it triggers an insecurity in the other and they make up. So this is exactly what is happening. Wise men and wise leaders will know that all these nations which are in contention, the big guys that have got nuclear weapons, that cannot be wished away, because if anything happens, if things get a little out of control, nuclear weapons can be alerted. Once nuclear weapons are alerted, then all, what do you say, gloves are off and anything can happen. So it is better not for nations to go there. And the history so far is all the nations which have nuclear weapons have always acted with caution. And I don't see why even the present lot or the future lot of leaders may not do so. So when India sees this map, it must look at its opportunities, and right in the heart of the Indian Ocean, like a knife into it. So it's got strategic strength there. It's also got the ability to trade in any direction through the seas. I'll stop here, and I teach a course in Takshashila, and I have this in which I say it's time to shoot the general. And that particular photograph, which is there, is drawn by one of my Air Force officer students. It shows me with my regimental insignia, which is the Garuda, and he's put the general's head on top of it. I must thank him for it because I love this. So over to you now. Please shoot the general.
Thanks, Lieutenant General, for that wonderful perspective. We will now open for QA session. Request you people to please kindly raise your hand, virtual hand, so that we can pick up and shoot the general. Yeah, Naveen. Go ahead, Naveen.
Yeah, hi, General. My question is
Request
that
you to introduce yourself before asking the question.
this is Naveen Garawal. I'm the Chief of Bureau for South India for the Tribune in Chandigarh. And my question to the General is that, we've seen China bullying its way. And now with it not only having the military power, it also has the economic power. And like you mentioned, a lot of countries owe China a lot of money. So is there a silver lining anywhere? I mean, especially when, it's just taken over the world like a big bully and doesn't even care about the US, which we thought was the superpower in the past.
Okay. We'll collect a couple of questions.
Sure. Anyone else? Deepa?
Hello, I'm Deepal Gala. I'm a senior features editor with the Times. That was a wonderful perspective, Mr. Prakash Menon. My question is that we also track how advanced China has become with AI and other technologies, where earlier there was the whole perspective where it was borrowing technologies from other nations, but now it seems to have its own very advanced technologies in many spaces. If you could give us some perspective, I'm sure you've studied this space, on how that also changes the balance of things. Yeah.
There's a question in chat box. Can I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. This is from Phanindra from Hans India, Hyderabad. He's asking issues of pain points for India on its western offshore region and eastern offshore region, maritime borders, against the backdrop of Bangladesh, China, Myanmar corridor and China-Pakistan economic corridor in the wake of Indo-Pacific Strategy. Second is how the issue related to human rights and governance in Asian countries still coping up with the issues of colonial legacies will have an impact on Indo-Pacific strategy at a time when countries like US, EU insisting human rights and minorities, etc. And his third question is how the Polar Silk Road will have an impact on the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Right. So shall I?
Yeah, please, I think.
So the first question, where is the silver lining? The silver lining is China's worst fears are now being realized, which is that powers are quite convinced that unless they cooperate and act together, the size and strength and behavior of China cannot be easily dealt with. This is China's greatest fears. There is no doubt about it. So what is most important today is cooperation. It's not about cooperation and wanting to attack China. And I think we must make this very clear difference. As I said, it's about cooperation to get China to be a responsible power which respects international norms and its rules and regulations. Of course, we run into a whole lot of other issues here because China can draw a whole lot of list of what the United States has done, especially being a policeman of the world for so long. So they could have a whole list which they could blame them for, and you could go on and on. But the point is that what is happening is this cooperation is because common interests are involved. That is the key. When common interests are involved and it's actually faces off against Chinese interests, not because it is directed purely there, because it is incidentally so. If China changes its behavior, if China becomes what it should be, if China listens to the International Court of Justice, takes back all these 9-line claims, it demilitarizes all those islands, but those things are not going to happen. Because in the real world, China is not even bothering to hide what it is attempting to do. It's like it's not hiding what it is doing with the Uyghurs or what it is internally doing with its own citizens. I mean, I was just reading today that the Chinese have actually, where people are not taking the COVID vaccine, Chinese have actually now threatened the parents and threatened the people against jobs and, whole lot of things which can win if they don't take vaccine. I mean, so, but I suppose if you really look at it, if you really talk in terms of international politics, this is Chinese sovereignty. Chinese actually got the right to exercise it the way they want. And of course, this problem of human rights will come to later. So the point is, the silver lining is everybody is woken up and let's hope they can cooperate. And that's a major one. Technology, I think, see, one of the most powerful things which China has been able to do is to make tremendous improvement in its technological base, because it started from below, from an education system which is starting from the school right up to higher education. They remodeled it and refashioned it. They sent out people to universities when, globalization was at the top, everybody welcomed the Chinese. Then quite a lot of them came back, and then China and herself is now, their universities rankings, you just see, I mean, they're ranked highest in the world. So Chinese education system has definitely been their source of strength and will continue to be this. And their technological power comes from that. But there are certain things which China actually is still not able to do. Because finally, we are talking about the United States. What is the greatest strength of the United States? The greatest strength of the United States is its human capital. That they're able to source it from anywhere in the world. Of course, Trump would have probably stopped it, but those are all minor blips in history. But the fact is that here it is where they can muster the best brains and leave them free to do what they want. China does not have that ability. That is China's strategic weakness. That is why China is still far behind in certain types of chips and so on, but is fast catching up. It cannot be ignored. And therefore, China is still vulnerable to certain amount of technology denial by the United States, which is what it is doing. Not now. That's what the Trump administration had started. It will hurt China, but will also get them finally to achieve it. So it works both ways. But remember, technology is on a fast track trajectory. You develop something, somebody else develops something else. The ability to create in the United States or in the Western world far outruns the ability of the state in China at a similar level. Finally, finally the Chinese might actually prove that we are wrong because the accomplishments that they had. But don't forget, they have stolen, they have copied, they've used a whole lot of other measures to get where they are. And when you do such things, there is always a problem somewhere down the line. So the point is that from that point of view, Chinese may profess to be the technology leaders of the world. After all, the amount of patents that they have got and so on, getting it. I mean, it's very, very impressive. But beyond that, at a very fundamental level, when we talk about the strength of nations, it is not a passing wave. It is on what is it founded? China's greatest weakness is actually its internal unity. And China's Communist Party is most concerned that unless they keep growing, social instability will bring the power elite down. That is what is their motivating factor. That is what is keeping them going. That is why any amount of effort, methods, political organization, very interesting. But I am afraid that there are some things that the Chinese will not be able to do because at the foundation level there are fault lines. And I think technology will be one of them. The CPEC and the maritime, the Myanmar corridor and so on. And of course, there are various other exertions in most of the Indian Ocean area can be understood in terms of they are wanting to be a power in the Indian Ocean. And the reason is very simple. The reason for them is that if they are not a power, then other people are going to actually bully us. After all, one of Chinese lessons from which Mao realized when he was being bullied by the United States, when he didn't have any nuclear weapons, was this. He realized that if we don't have nuclear weapons, everybody is going to bully us. So that is one of the reasons why. So he has a logic. This is the logic of security which he has. But it has to sit with the logic of geoeconomics. So he's using geoeconomics to further his security, that is his geopolitical ambitions. That ambition is not about wanting war. It's about keeping the peace, but at China's terms. That is the difference. So China will do whatever it has to make that happen. Of course, it's of course, if you look at history and if you look at what is happening today, it looks in some ways, the Asians must tell themselves that it looks like that we are ourselves inviting the colonialists back. We have actually, by the way, they never left. Because if you look at the Indian Ocean itself, and if you look at France for that matter, the islands that they own in Western Indian Ocean, look at Digagashia, which has been a military base for so long. You look at many of the specific islands under American or Australian tutelage, they never left. But the fact is that the area, which is Asian mostly, is now inviting the type of people who actually colonized you at some time or the other. But that's just a fact. But this time it is not colonization. That's what China is doing to the rest. This time, hopefully, it is partnership to actually further mutual interests. So the nature of the relationship is different. And therefore, China has at this point in time military bases. It's developing one in Gwadar. It's got one in Djibouti. It'll probably have one on the east coast of Africa. Maldives is now out of its grip. Bangladesh is unlikely. Sri Lanka is unlikely. Military base. Myanmar is possible. Depends upon how things pan out there. And this will be a quest. I mean, it's like their argument is if the Americans can have Digogashia, and by the way, the islanders of Digogashia went all the way and claimed and fought in the International Court of Justice, they never got the island back. So you can have any argument. I mean, you can't stop them from actually coming because they're saying we're doing it legitimately. We are being invited by the governments who will benefit from our being there. So that's the logic of it. So this will continue. This hedging, the Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean will grow. But what we must be aware of now is because of the groupings lately, do not be surprised that China will drive a wedge in the Quad. And India and Japan will be the prime targets because they are proximate to China. What form that will take is impossible to predict. But going forward, we should not be surprised. Unless, of course, the Chinese have got some other things up their sleeve and change their behavior. So human rights is okay for a conversation, because if you look at all these nations which are talking about human rights, everybody has got enough skeletons in their own cupboards. The question is one of degree. So democracy as an ideology which unites is good to cover the book, to show that it looks nice. But it is not deep enough to make a whole relationship whole. Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That's North Korea's official name. There's nothing democratic about that. So, human rights will be used because Biden is very strong on it. I'm sure the Indians will have an answer to that. And of course, some would say that Indians will find it difficult to answer. Nothing of the sort. But it's not a store shopper, not in the relationship, because that is just the cover. The book has got many other things. The Polar Silk Road. Oh, yes. That's an activity where China and Russia are actually doing a whole lot of stuff. It will take time, but as is always the case, the Europeans and the Americans and even the Indians are into it. That's an area of contestation going forward. There is a whole lot of things happening there. The ice is melting because of climate change, but it will still take a little bit of time before you can actually say it will become a passage which can be used as a freeway. That will take some time. We don't know how long, because that depends upon climate change, but it's happening very fast. The glaciers are melting, the ice caps are actually just falling into the ocean. So a whole lot of things happening there, and China is not being left behind, because one of the escapes which they have is to actually open that route, that give, and that also frees them from being boxed in by geography. It's looking for geographic outlets, passages by which it can trade, which is a legitimate act. So really speaking, one cannot complain about China wants to trade. What it does with the power trade gives us is a different issue. And that is where probably we might be in disagreement. So I think I've answered whatever I could.
We have second set of bullets ready to shoot you.
Yeah.
So Kurmanath, do you have something you written? Would you like to ask? Kurmanath? Or should I read it?
Yeah, actually, Mr. Menon.
Your voice is a bit low from me.
Hello, is it better?
Yeah, this is better.
Mr. Menon, that was a very nice overview of the China and its friends and foes. What is the kind of relationships it has with Russia on the northern side? They are friends or foes, or they have some issues like us?
Right. Okay. Thanks.
There's one more in the chat box. Would you like to take it?
Can I also ask a follow-up question? There is a lot of concern about how China and Pakistan bond and how that relationship would impact India. The second thing is that there are analysts who said that the one way to contain China is to change their to change the way China has worked on its global trade, and to take back the kind of absolute dependence the world has on that nation. It didn't sound very practical when it was discussed, but what's your thought on what would your thoughts be on that, Menon?
Yeah, one more at the chat box.
Yeah, can I ask that chat box question? I'm Rekha Dixit from the Week magazine.
Yeah, please go ahead.
We were talking about all these strategies to contain China, to be able to come up with some kind of strategy to keep it in place and stuff like that. China is, undoubtedly really big right now. And it's taken on the US, forget us. How do we expect that there will not be a backlash to the kind of groupings, to the kind of initiatives that are being taken? Already they are not liking it. And obviously they are going to hit out. In the past, we have seen that whenever we've done something, I really look at, helping Dalai Lama as the reason for a lot of our problems. Do you not think that these kind of groupings with India is, very, very actively taking part in, may have some kind of backlash? And if there would be a backlash, is India prepared to take on that backlash? Thanks.
Okay. Is that the last one?
Yeah, that's
okay. Right. Thanks. Okay, so the first one is Russia. That's an interesting question. So, because of the American relations with Russia, what has happened now is that Russia has been pushed into the arms of the Chinese, who were just wanting just that. And therefore, the relationship between Russia and China has grown, deepened. But we must understand that relationship, like all relationships, have also got their limitations. And what are those limitations? Limitations are that the Russians are also concerned about Chinese taking over their traditional sphere of influence, especially in Central Asia. One. Two, when Russia, such a big power, Soviet Union, such a big power at one time, is now a junior partner with China, because China is now under any measure or index of this thing, except for nuclear weapons, China is far ahead. It is a relationship of necessity. It is not a relationship that they would want in particular. And certainly, that relationship has birthed what you call the concept of Eurasia, which stretches from Eastern Europe to East Asia. And India is very much a part of that concept, which talks about a common interest and it has the same anti-terrorism, economics, the works, security cooperation. And that's why we are now part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And we actually now tenant on the same table. We have BRICS and we have RIC and we have a whole lot of other acronyms, groupings which we are part of, in which China and Russia are there. So India actually is in both. So the question, which is, how will our relationship with Russia be affected? Lavrov just left. He left India. He was in Pakistan yesterday. It's interesting to see his joint statement given after his Pakistan, where he talks about the growing friendship between Russia and Pakistan. After all, historically, it's quite a large turn of events. After all, what the Pakistanis did to the Russians in Afghanistan probably is just now a piece of history which Russia just have to swallow it and carry on. But the fact is that Russia, because of Afghanistan and because of the Chinese interest there, has been for quite some time stretching out to Pakistan. But they have assured us that doesn't affect the relationship with us. And if you see the joint statement between Jaishankar and Lavrov, when he came here, of course, the issue of Quad has been raised, and Jaishankar's reply was that, we're saying that it's not against anybody. And they always quote the famous Modi speech at the Shangri-La dialogue a couple of years ago. So the point is Russia and India. And there is another thing which we have not spoken about today till now, but I think I need to bring it. Is the issue of soft power. The problem with China also is that it lacks soft power, the ability to influence by conviction, which Americans, the Indians definitely have much more in their kitty. And even between Russia and India, between the people of the two countries and so on, soft power plays a role. But of course, it can't by itself, it cannot do it. It has to be backed by other forms of power. So Russia, India's dependence, and we can tell you, on Russia for military hardware itself will continue for quite some time. We can't just say that Russia has now become an enemy of ours. India can't afford it. So definitely our relationship will have to keep that in mind. These are the complexities of any relationship. We'll have to keep that in mind, that we are dependent and the Russians are willing. And even in the joint statement, they talk about Russia providing technology and so on, which is one country which has provided a lot of military technology. So Russia is very important to us and will continue to be so. They have their misgivings about our becoming part of the Quad, but those are things which hopefully will be sorted out through diplomacy and deft political leadership. China and Pakistan, of course. I mean, the question which later was formed is China and Pakistan is a relationship which is also getting increasingly complicated because of the fact that Pakistan is not an easy state for any country to deal. The progress of the CPEC itself is testimony to the problems which Chinese are facing and the problem of debt and so on. But Pakistan is very important to China, not only because it gives them an avenue to the Indian Ocean, because in the larger struggle, what has China done? China has always been sensitive to India's tilt in global politics because it was clear by the beginning of 2000 that China's rise is going to be constant. India, for its size, can make a difference to that. So what did China do? It has blatantly supported Pakistan anyway. Nuclear weapons, nuclear technology, you name it. Even in international fora, when actually it was the culprit on terrorism, China is the country which blocks it. It's been its savior. It has used Pakistan to kill with a borrowed sword, as they say, and drawn India's resources towards Pakistan. So that it was distracted by Pakistan, and we sort of took our eye off the ball on the northern border. Not only took the eye off the ball, even when we had the eye on the ball, we didn't devote enough resources to it. So the Chinese succeeded in creating certain amount of, you can say, leverage, military leverage points which they can utilize. But I think the larger game for China, and this we must understand, and you people must understand, because I started by saying the small stuff must be connected to the larger game. The larger game, as far as China is concerned, is the Indian Ocean. They don't want India to be a maritime power of any consequence. Maritime power requires resources. If India has to spend its money internally on Pakistan, on the northern borders, we don't have money to become a maritime power, or they will slow it down. That is why they are not going to solve the boundary issue. They are going to keep it simmering. They would like to draw India's resources to the Himalayas, keep it away from maritime power. This is China's strategy, but this is a theory. But to me, I think it is very obvious, because that is what we've been doing for several decades. China is not interested in actually gaining some territory in that high altitude area of Ladakh. And I've been there, I've served there, I know what it means. It makes no sense at all. But the reasons have to be a larger game, and I think we need to understand that. Dependence on China. Well, the move is away, but China has actually become the manufacturing hub of the world. So even while people have started moving out, it will take its time. There is no easy way out of this. And in fact, if you see the European corporate this thing into China itself, there is a whole lot of moves by them to keep the business in China going. And as an aside, I must tell you about, I wonder if you heard the story of what China did to the European company H&M because H&M made a statement against, which was against the Uyghur Muslims, use of Uyghur Muslims, and something about growing cotton there. And the Chinese got after H&M, and H&M now, the H&M shops in China's maps have been taken off. So if you want to go to by taxi or you want to use your Google map, Bedo maps to go there, H&M shops don't exist. That's the type of things which they actually have done. So dependence on China is real, even for us, but that dependence will shift. But there is limitation to shift because there is an economic logic which keeps it with China. That logic is not easy to go away. They make actually a whole lot of stuff which they can distribute cheap. So we'll have to see how geopolitics actually tries to push geoeconomics. And in that game, normally geopolitics will normally have its say. But geopolitics will have to be governed by the benefits of geoeconomics, because eventually it's about the welfare of the people of the country which they're talking about. That means economic growth. So if you do anything against that, and if your people are going to be affected, you're hurting yourself. So that's the logic. And of course, the last one is about the backlash. Oh yeah, of course. Yes, of course. China's backlash is certain. That's why I said that the Chinese, and as far as India is concerned, if we worry about backlashes and then listen to what China is telling us, that we are strong, better listen to what we are saying, we better behave the way that we are telling you to do, then our strategic autonomy and our freedom for which we have fought is over. We will be swallowed up by what we call a Chinosphere, which they are trying to establish. You know, the Chinese have an imagination of the fact that they are a kingdom of heaven. On the rest of them are actually just surrogates which have to be ruled over. That's this, it comes from Chinese history itself. That is their imagination. I don't think India need to be worried about Chinese trying to bully us. Let us have confidence in ourselves. It is not going to be easy, but at least first thing is, let us have confidence in ourselves. Let us have confidence in the leaders that we have, hopefully. Let us have confidence in the people. Because Chinese seems to have a hell of a lot of confidence. And I think some of that confidence must be just about misplaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Prakash Menon. It was a very nice masterclass, and I'm sure all my media friends enjoyed it.